What's the difference between these two phrasal verbs? Would you be able to use them confidently when speaking? How many meanings of these phrasal verbs do you know? This is Verb It Up, a video series where you can learn all you need to know about phrasal verbs. In this video, we'll be learning 10 phrasal verbs at the B2 and the C1 level. We'll show you exactly how and when to use them, and we'll give you tips about how you can practice them in your everyday conversation. There'll be plenty of exercises and a story for you to listen to these verbs in context and really remember how to use them. And at the end of the video, I'll explain to you why we can split up some phrasal verbs. Or rather, split some phrasal verbs up. Keep watching. So let's start with our phrasal verbs today. Do you know them? Now that's a tricky question. A better question would be, how many meanings of these phrasal verbs do you know? Yes, meanings. Lots of phrasal verbs in English have multiple meanings, and these meanings are spread across all the different levels. For example, let's take the first verb on our list, come up. Now, actually, come up has one meaning that we need to know at B2, 4 meanings that we need to know at C1, and then it has at least 2 meanings at C2. And I'm saying at least because, well, this is phrasal verbs, so you never know. A new meaning might just come up. Anyway, it would be a pointless exercise to focus on one phrasal verb and all its different meanings. It's far better to take one meaning of the phrasal verb and focus on it in a specific context so we can really learn how that phrasal verb is used in that meaning, in that context. And this is precisely what we'll be doing here. For each of our phrasal verbs today, I'm going to show you a short clip so that you can associate the phrasal verb with the context in which it is used. Let's start with come up. Have a look. So hopefully you saw from the video that come up is a verb which is often used in the context of time. When something is about to happen or something is approaching, we can use this verb in a very natural way. For example, I can say, my exams are coming up next week. Or, the big announcement is coming up today. As you can see from these examples, come up is a phrasal verb that's often used in present continuous. In order to practice it, you can think about things or events that are approaching in your life and make sentences about them. Of course, use come up in present continuous. The next verb on our list is come up with. Now, if you remember in the introduction, I asked you if you knew the difference between come up and come up with. And you may think, well, it's only a difference in the preposition, but actually these are two completely different verbs. This one preposition changes the meaning of come up completely, so it's worth remembering this for the future. If you ever see two phrasal verbs which are almost identical and the difference is that one has an extra preposition, treat them as two completely separate words and check both of them in a dictionary. And now it's time to look at the video for come up with. This video showed somebody who clearly thought of something. They had an idea. And this is precisely what come up with means, to think of something. We very often use it with words such as idea, solution, or suggestion. These are collocations, words that go with come up with in a natural way. Unfortunately, we have no rules for collocations and we always need to check them in the dictionary. But use them and you will sound very natural. For example, we could say, Mary came up with a great solution. Or, we tried to come up with some ideas during the meeting. To practice it in your daily conversation, you can use it in situations when you have a problem. You can then say, let's come up with a solution. Or let's see what we can come up with. Our next verb is end up. And I'm going to show you a video of a guy who wanted to make a cake, but things didn't go exactly to plan. Have a look. End up is an extremely common phrasal verb. We use it when we talk about results or consequences of something. In our case, the man wanted to make a cake, but he ended up burning it. In here, end up is used to show consequences. Let's have a look at more examples. We could also say, I broke my leg and ended up in hospital. Or, everything was so expensive that we ended up spending lots of money. Notice that when we have a verb after end up, this verb has an ing. It's a gerund. So remember that next time you use end up with another verb, you need to use that verb as a gerund with the ing at the end. Our next verb is get out. So let's have a look at another video. In here, the hamster is trapped in a cage. It clearly wants to escape, but it can't. It can't get out. So get out means to escape something or to avoid it. For example, the baby couldn't get out of the cot. I really want to get out of that project. Notice that when we put an object after get out, the verb is followed by of. Get out of something. Also, see that we don't only use get out for escaping from somewhere physically, but also in situations when we want to avoid something. So is there anything in your life that you'd like to get out of? Like having kids, family, or work? Why don't you make your own example? Right, the next verb on our list is bump into. Have a look at the video. The context is quite clear, isn't it? Did they expect to meet? No. Was this an accident? Yes. And this is basically what bump into means. It's either to walk into somebody by accident or to meet somebody by accident. So, for example, we could say, he wasn't looking where he was walking and he bumped into her. Or, I bumped into an old friend yesterday. Remember that bump into somebody doesn't have to have the dramatic meaning of crashing into somebody. It can simply mean meeting somebody by accident. It's an informal verb that can be used very naturally in everyday conversation. So think, when was the last time you bumped into somebody? 4 more verbs to go. Let's have a look at be off. In this video, a doctor was giving a prescription to her patient. I want you to think that the patient is sick and has to stay at home, which means she can't go to work. In other words, she's going to be off work. To be off is a phrasal verb we very often use when somebody is unable to be at work. It doesn't have to be connected with sickness or illness. It can simply be for any other reason. For instance, I can say, Jenny is off today, so I'm answering all her emails. Or, I'll be off tomorrow, so I need to finish all my tasks. So next time when you're working and somebody is asking you for somebody whom you know is not there, just tell them, I'm sorry, my colleague is off today. Can I help you? Only 3 more verbs to go. Let's do go on and watch another video. In the video, we saw a man who was working on a computer, and then something happened. Something the man didn't understand. In situations like these, where we don't understand what's happening, we very often use go on and say, "What's going on?" This means, "What's happening? I don't understand." It doesn't always have to be negative. You can simply use go on to mean that something is happening. For example, many spectators were leaving as the concert was going on. Or, my mother had no idea what was going on. Notice that when we use go on in this meaning, we very often use it in continuous tenses. And now let's have a look at take over. I want to introduce Jake to you. Jake is a very busy man. He has lots of family and work responsibilities. He works at a tech company, and today one of his colleagues is off. Jake's boss phones him and asks him if he could do some of the tasks that his colleague was doing. How do you think Jake is going to react to that? Let's have a look at the video. Well, clearly, Jake doesn't want to accept his colleague's responsibilities. In other words, he is refusing to take over his colleague's tasks. Take over is a frequent verb in the context of being responsible for somebody else's tasks at work while they're away. For example, Sam will be taking over Karen's tasks this week. Or, now that Jim has left, somebody will need to take over his responsibilities. Have you ever had to take over anybody's responsibilities at work? When was the last time this happened? Make a sentence. And now let's look at our final verb today. Throw up. Have a look at the video. Clearly, the woman in the video is not feeling very well. She wants to vomit. In other words, she wants to throw up. Now, unlike vomit, which is slightly more formal, throw up is a very casual phrasal verb which is used in everyday conversation. For example, you could say, "I'm not feeling very well. I think I'm gonna throw up." Or, "My little daughter threw up in bed last night." So next time you're in a situation when you want to use the verb vomit, and it's a casual, everyday situation, remember about throw up and use it instead. You're going to sound more natural and more fluent. So these are our phrasal verbs for today. Let's use them in context now. A frequent problem that a lot of students have with phrasal verbs is that they don't know how to practice them. So let's do a little exercise that will enable you to use these verbs that we have just learned in a very natural context. By the way, you can download a PDF with the summary of all the verbs that we're doing, plus the exercises from a link in the description below. So make sure you click that link and start practicing these verbs today. And now let's come back to our little exercise. I'm going to show you some sentences. In each sentence, there will be some words in bold. Your task is to think how these words in bold can be replaced with one of the phrasal verbs that you have just learned. Let's do the first example together. Have a look. Which phrasal verb can you use to replace the words in bold here? This sentence is talking about the result of something, right? He was walking for such a long time that eventually he had holes in his shoes. Which phrasal verb expresses the meaning of consequences and results? End up. And of course, this is an exercise with verbs, so we need to use them in the correct form. He walked so much, he ended up with holes in his shoes. Now that you know how this exercise works, let's go through some more sentences. Have a look at the next one. Which phrasal verb would you use to replace the words in bold? If you said go on, you're right. At first, I had no idea what was going on. Let's look at another sentence. What do you think? How can we replace to be about to happen? What is this about? Time, right? And the phrasal verb from today that's associated with time is come up. I have a very important meeting coming up. Let's look at another one. How can you replace the words in bold here? What is the sentence talking about? Responsibilities, right? So which phrasal verb do we use to talk about accepting somebody else's responsibilities at work? If you're thinking about take over, then you are completely right. Greg is away this week, so I'm taking over all of his clients. Let's have a look at another sentence. How can you replace vomited? Do you remember the casual counterpart of the verb to vomit? If you're thinking about throw up, you're completely right. Jonah complained of a stomachache and he threw up after dinner. Let's look at another one. Which common phrasal verb do you use to say that somebody is not working? Be off. Susan is on holidays, so she'll be off tomorrow. Next. Do you remember the phrasal verb we can use to mean avoid something? If you're thinking of get out, you are right. Instead of trying to get out of this task, you should do it as quickly as possible. We've got 2 more examples to go. Let's have a look at the next one. What phrasal verb do we use to mean that we meet somebody by chance? Bump into. I bumped into the CEO at the parking lot today. And finally, our last sentence. Have a look. This sentence talks about finding ideas. Do you remember the phrasal verb we use with words such as idea, suggestion, or solution? If you're thinking about come up with, you are completely right. If you come up with a good solution, please let me know. Well done. And now we are almost ready for our story. Almost, because first, if this video is bringing you any value, please make sure you click the subscribe button below so that you don't miss any of our future content. And if you're not ready for that type of commitment yet, please like the video as it gives me feedback and tells me that I'm doing a reasonably good job teaching you English. In fact, it also lets YouTube know that it should recommend this video to anyone who is looking for content on learning English. Finally, if you come up with any suggestions as to what I should be making videos on, please let me know in the comments below. I really appreciate your ideas because this is what keeps this channel going. And now, let's get back to our story. Listen and see if you can understand what happened. Pay attention to how the phrasal verbs from today are used to tell the story. If you're a little more advanced, try to do the exercise without reading the text. As the team leader said my name, everybody looked at me. The fact that my name was even on my team leader's list was apparently a surprise for everyone, including myself. I simply couldn't believe my ears. In fact, all I could do at that moment was think, how the hell can I get out of this? Ironically, my name wouldn't have even ended up on my boss's list if we hadn't bumped into each other that morning. I was walking along the corridor when I saw her looking out of the window with a worried expression on her face. She seemed a bit lost, so I asked her if she was okay. When she told me she had a problem she couldn't solve, I wanted to know more and asked what was going on. She explained that one of our colleagues had broken his leg and had to be off for 6 weeks. She was really concerned that we wouldn't be able to meet our deadlines with one team member fewer. Now, I'm not generally a very proactive person, but I don't like watching people suffer, so without thinking too much, I decided to help her and said that I could take that guy's projects over until he returned to work. Now that I think of it, I couldn't have come up with a worse suggestion, but of course she absolutely loved it and couldn't stop saying how incredible it was of me to volunteer. Volunteer for what, exactly? I wanted to ask, starting to get nervous about what I'd just done. It was then that I realized I actually had no idea which of my colleagues had broken his leg. But there was no time to think. The time of the general meeting was coming up, and there were some important announcements to be made. As I sat in my chair listening to my team leader, I couldn't stop thinking I'd just made a big mistake by offering my help. And then she confirmed it.
Mary Durrant, Adam Johnson, Keith Waters.
Adam Johnson? That was me. Suddenly I felt as if I was going to throw up. They were sending me 2,000 kilometers north to Scotland, where I would be overseeing a new project. A project my colleague Mark couldn't oversee because just yesterday he had broken his leg. Well done! Did you understand the general meaning of the story? Were the phrasal verbs easy or difficult to understand? Let me know in the comments below, and make sure you click that link to get the summary of everything we've been doing here today. By the way, there's also another link with the audio file of me reading the text to you so that you can download it and listen to it whenever you want. A text like this is a great opportunity for you to develop language flexibility and fluency by paraphrasing. So if you can try to use your own words and the phrasal verbs you have learned to tell the story again. Now, in the introduction to the video, I promised that we would speak about phrasal verbs where we can separate the verb and the preposition. I said that we can split some verbs up. In the story, we used take over in a very similar way. I could take that guy's projects over. So what happened with the phrasal verbs in these sentences? We can see that the verb and the preposition are no longer together now. They are separated by an object. Phrasal verbs that can be used in this way are called separable. This means we have the flexibility of separating the verb and the preposition by putting an object in between. We can say, we can split some phrasal verbs up, or we can split up some phrasal verbs. And in the context of the other sentence, we can also say, I could take that guy's projects over, or I could take over that guy's projects. Both sentences would be correct. However, if we use a separable phrasal verb and the word that we put between the verb and the preposition is a pronoun, we must always split the verb. Let's see this in practice. In our first sentence, we can use the pronoun them to refer to some phrasal verbs. In this case, the only correct way of making the sentence is by splitting the phrasal verb. We can split them up. Them is a pronoun, so we have no other option and we must separate the verb. If we said we must split up them, it would be incorrect. In our second sentence, we can also use the pronoun them to refer to that guy's projects. Again, because we are using a pronoun, we must separate the phrasal verb. I could take them over. Again, if we didn't do that and said, I could take over them, it would be incorrect. So how do we know if a phrasal verb is separable or not? Well, the best place to look for this information is a dictionary. Let's check take over. As you can see here, there are two meanings of this verb that have a little arrow pointing in both directions next to it. This little arrow means that the verb is separable. So in here we can say Paul's daughter took over the job in 2017, or Paul's daughter took the job over in 2017. So when you're learning new meanings of phrasal verbs, look for this double-sided arrow and see if it's next to the verb you are learning. In fact, not next to the verb that you are learning, next to the meaning of that verb. It's important because some verbs have meanings that are separable and some meanings that are not separable. A good example of this is take over. We can see here that at B2 and C1, both of these meanings of take over are separable. But if we scroll up a little, we will see that there is another meaning here which is not separable. There is no double-sided arrow next to it. And this brings us back very nicely to what we talked about at the beginning of this video. When learning phrasal verbs, learn one meaning at a time and always in context. And that's it for this video. If I haven't bored you to death by talking about separable and non-separable phrasal verbs and you're still with me and breathing, do click that subscribe button so you don't miss any of our future content. And if for some reason you haven't had enough and you're still hungry for more, why don't you click that video to see what I've got for you? Take care, keep learning, and enjoy the process. Thank you very much for watching.